One of the first things we did together was to map our common interests and create a manifesto to critique our design decisions against and to ensure we addressed our aims for the project. Our early work into habits and habitats investigated people's idiosyncrasies through a series of pseudoscientific experiments, which saw us designing scenarios that demanded participants' interactions or observed interactions in the wild. We staged interventions to capture unexpected actions and designed loose frameworks to encourage variety. We also experimented on ourselves, keen to understand the effect of being knowingly observed.
We recorded traces of interactions and translated them to other media, making the familiar stories strange, discovering the biases and impacts of translators and the importance of the action's context.
Idiosyncrasies showed us the actions of agents navigating control and other agents' influences.
Using reenactment to feel the strangeness of these idiosyncrasies, we asked others to do the same, experimenting with different input information and investigating aspects of physical participation such as priming and the edges of an experience.
National lockdown in response to the pandemic pushed us all into homogeneous interactions, interrupted only by the itchiness of glitches. Faceless standards replacing lively interactions prompted us to run a performance lecture, inviting our audience to become participants, combating this flatness by embracing the glitch, modulating the call with live code and music. As COVID began blurring the physical and digital worlds, we used our theses to dig deeper into interactions. I focused on agency, being encouraged at a range of scales, and using different media to commune with the ineffable. Seeing that Ian Bogos' concept of circumscribing playgrounds could encourage idiosyncratic experimentation, particularly together.
Irritated by the flatness of online communication platforms, I investigated how to design to facilitate messiness in interactions. That is, the nuanced and multisensory ways in which we communicate beyond just words. Laura Mark's concept of haptic visuality became integral as we began to design hybrid shared spaces, bristling with texture and energy, encouraging you to feel.
Keen to continue experimenting on our own interactions, we began the process of constructing a shared identity, directly using what we had learned from our theses, circumscribing our playground without COVID-19 and submitting to constraints we agreed upon, connected to the findings from our early experiments, attempting to reconnect through this process in a time of physical distance. Instead, the project became intensely personal and highlighted our idiosyncrasies as designers, birthing the monads as characters that encapsulated our differences as both avatars and lived selves, capturing the stresses of our collaboration during COVID. We employed a concept from Mahalia's thesis, the virtual window, and used liveness or shared time as a shared space, reviewing and modifying our constraints in order to openly catalyse messy interactions between us.
At Ars Electronica, we used generated constraints and COVID narratives from a live audience to influence the production of masks, blurring physical and digital interactions and exposing the process as a site of ineffable messiness.
Eager to investigate online interactions further, we briefly experimented with developing AR masks, realising that existing online platforms that aim for smooth, optimal experiences clash with our own objectives. We needed to design our own platform and chose Unity to develop an online multiplayer experience. Spatialising the components of the experience we wanted and their interconnectedness proved a challenge, so we mapped out their connections and simply masked spaces for them to inhabit, trying to envisage a participant's experience, but designing as though for the physical world left us cold. We returned to the idea of haptic visuality, which we had explored through the costumes, and combined clashing visual styles with visceral glitchiness. We explored physically impossible but familiar spaces and asked ourselves about the interactions we imagined at different scales and how they would impact each other.
Did different interactions imply different spaces or qualities of spaces?
We began to describe a world that connected our theses to the design of a reconfigurable shared space.
I think our lives should look radically different right now than they normally do. I would say limit your face-to-face interactions, work remotely whenever possible, no handshakes, no high fives, no hugs outside home, and stand 6 feet or more away.
And that's what play means. I think play isn't doing what you want, but doing what you can with the materials that you find.
Thinking about these spaces' atmospheres and how certain content could be experienced, switching to subtractive modelling became a breakthrough, allowing us to create explorable pockets and chambers, designing spaces from the inside out and inviting players into our chaotic network.
We also needed space for live interactive performance, a feature of our work since the beginning, and now acting as a digital window.
Adding to the clashing visual languages, we embedded our story into the space by translating data about our communications across the whole of lockdown and across different platforms into shards representing our peaks and troughs, lovingly called the Cathedral of Erratic Miseries after Stritta's Mertbau. They became a distinct counterpoint to the boroughs, and we iterated through Cinema 4D and Unity. The development of the space ran alongside the development of a user interface, co-opting the language of video games and producing familiar but strange interactions, like a chat box that changes behaviour in different spaces.
The technical challenge of multiplayer terraforming a landscape with agency and constraints again highlighted the novelty of designing a platform that favoured messy experimental interactions over flat predictable ones. Prototypes of the live performance, with its participant feedback loops, were designed and built into the costumes, and cemented the monads as participants, who modified the playground's constraints and invited players to question their own capacities.
The project has remained true to its intentions to design a shared space with agency that invites players to question their interactions and uses liveness as a way to connect with others, communing with and through hybrid spaces and collaborating in times of physical disconnection.
Thank you.
This chat box glitches my messages.